Hello everyone. In today's video lecture, we are going to study about testing and verification. Tests fall into three main categories. The first set of tests verifies that the chip performs its intended function or functionality tests. Logic verification. What does this mean? The verification whether the chip is going to perform its intended function, we call it as the functionality test or logical verification. The second set of tests are run on the first batch of chips that return from fabrication, and this is done to confirm that the chip operates as it was intended. Third set of tests verify that every transistor, gate, and storage element in the chip functions correctly. Conducted on each manufactured chip before shipping to the customer, we call it as the manufacturing tests. So basically what is testing? We apply inputs to the system and compare the outputs from the system with the output from a working system, so that we'll come to know whether the circuit is working or the system is working properly or not. Now, when we are conducting the manufacturing tests, it gives us yield of an IC. Yield of an IC, it is nothing but the number of good die by total number of die per wafer. Now, because of complexity of manufacturing process, not all die on the wafer function correctly. Dust particles and small imperfections in the starting material or photo masking can result in bridged connections or missing features. So these are termed as faults. Thus, testing a die can occur at wafer level, packaged chip level, board level, system level, and field level. What do you mean by logical verification? The figure shows that RTL is equivalent. RTL is register transistor logic. It implies that it is equivalent to design specification at a higher behavioral or specification level of abstraction. The behavioral specification might be verbal, description, plain language, textual specification, description in high-level computer language, like a program in system modeling language, or hardware description language, or simply a table of inputs and the required outputs. Functional equivalence involves running a simulator at gate level and at functional level. So test benches are employed in HDL or hardware description language. Because of increase in level of complexity of the chips, the system's real-time or near real-time emulation is done in FPGA-based system. The functional equivalence can be checked through simulation at various levels of design hierarchy. So here we already know basically how the VLSI design steps or design abstraction is. First, you have the behavioral specification, RTL specification, structural specification, and physical specification. So we will be performing formal verification or test vector equivalence. Then timing analysis, noise analysis is done. Layout versus schematic, power analysis, DRC, that is design rule check, ERC, parasitic extraction, are verified. Logic verification principles. A verification test bench or harness is a piece of HDL code that is placed as wrapper around a core piece of HDL. In simplest test bench, inputs are applied to the module under test, and at each cycle, the outputs are examined to determine whether they comply with a predefined expected data set, which can be derived from another model and available as a file, or the value can be computed on the fly. Simulators usually provide set table breakpoints and single or multiple stepping abilities to allow the designer to step through a test sequence while debugging discrepancies. Regressive testing. High-level language scripts are frequently used when running large test bench for regressive testing. It involves performing a suite of simulations to automatically verify that no functionality has inadvertently changed in a module or set of modules. During a design, regression scripts is run every night after design activities have concluded to check that bug fixes or feature enhancements have not broken completed modules. Version control. It is combined with regression testing. Version control is used, that is orderly management of different design iterations. Unix or Linux tools are used for this purpose. Bug tracking. Bug tracking system such as Unix or Linux based GNATs allow management of wide variety of bugs during verification. Each bug is entered and the location, nature and severity of the bug is noted. The bug discovered is noted along with perceived person responsible for fixing the bug. Manufacturing test principles. Methods of testing circuits should be incorporated in VLSI design and should proceed concurrently with any architectural considerations. Exhaustive testing. A combinational circuit with n inputs is tested exhaustively by applying a sequence of 2 to the power of n inputs or the test vectors. That is, 2 to the power of n test vectors are applied and observing the behavior of the circuit, that means what the outputs are. This combinational circuit is converted into sequential circuit with addition of m registers. The state of the circuit is determined by inputs and the previous state. A minimum of 2 to the power of n plus m test vectors must be applied to exhaustively test the circuit. Thus, exhaustive testing is infeasible when number of inputs is more. Now, if we consider an example here, this particular circuit or the system has 25 inputs. So, we need to apply 2 to the power of 25 test patterns or test vectors. And 10 lakhs patterns per second or megahertz tester. Time required is 33 seconds per chip. About million chips are to be tested in a run. Then 3 crores 30 lakhs seconds or 5 lakhs 50,000 hours or 22,916 days or 62 years would be required. Functional testing cannot be performed due to extremely high testing time. Fault models. To deal with the existence of good and bad parts, it's necessary to propose a fault model, that is, model for how faults occur and their impact on the circuit. So popular faults are stuck-at faults and short circuit or open circuit faults. Generally, the stuck-at faults are further classified into stuck-at 0 or stuck-at 1. In the stuck-at model, a fault gate input is modeled at stuck-at 0 or stuck-at 1. That means that particular input, even though you are changing the value of the input, it remains at 0, then we call it as stuck-at 0, and if it remains at 1, we call it as stuck-at 1. These faults mostly occur due to gate oxide shorts, that is NMOS gate to ground or PMOS gate to VDD, or metal to metal shorts. In this example, you can see here this input of the gate, it is shorted to VDD even though it was not implied in the circuit. So this input is stuck at 1. Similarly, in this diagram, this input is stuck at 0 because this input is always connected to the ground. You can see stuck at 1 when without intention there is short circuit of the input with the VDD. Similarly, stuck at 0 if the input is connected to ground. The most common model used for logical faults is the single stuck-at fault. It assumes that a fault in a logic gate results in one of its inputs or the output fixed at either logic 0, which we call it as stuck-at 0, or at logic 1, which we call stuck-at 1. Stuck-at 0, stuck-at 1 faults are often abbreviated as SA0 and SA1 respectively. Now let the A input of this particular 2-input NAND gate be stuck at 1. NAND gate perceives the A input as logic 1 because A input is stuck at 1. So A input will be considered as 1 irrespective of the logic value placed on the input. The output of the NAND gate is 0 for the input pattern A is equal to 0 and B equal to 1 when the input A is stuck at 1. Basically, when we give A is equal to 0 and B is equal to 1, the NAND gate should give me logic 1. But because the A input is stuck at 1, so even though we are giving 0 as the input to the A input, because it is stuck at 1, it will be taking the input as 1. And B anyway we have given the input as 1. So the inputs given to the NAND gate would be 1, 1. So that output will be 0. But actually the output should have been 1. So in the absence of the fault, the output will be 1. Thus, AB equal to 0, 1 can be considered as test for A input to be at stuck at 1 fault, since there is a difference between the output of the fault-free and the faulty gate. Short circuit and open circuit faults. Two bridging or shorted faults are shown in the figure. Here A input is connected to the ground and here this particular connection is connected to the output. The short S1 results in stuck at 0 fault at the input A, while the short S2 modifies the function of the gate because you can see that this connection is connected to the output. To ensure accurate modeling, the faults should be modeled at the transistor level as complete circuit structure is known only at this level. Test generation should take account of possible shorts and open circuits at switch level. So you can see here A input is connected to the ground because of the short and S2 will be connected to the output metal. In CMOS circuit, a fault can convert combinational circuit into sequential circuit. In figure 1, showing NOR gate here, one of the transistors is rendered ineffective. NMOS transistor A is stuck at open, because this actual NOR gate connection should have been like this, but here it is open. So Z is equal to A plus B whole bar plus A plus B whole bar plus B bar Z dash. Here this Z dash is the previous state of the gate. So the same thing is shown in the mask layout here. This is the open condition. Now figure 2, here the transistors can exhibit stuck open or stuck closed states. Stuck closed states can be detected by observing static VDD current, that is IDD, while applying the test vectors. Static VDD current or IDD is the current that is flowing between VDD and ground. In a 2-input NOR gate, the drain of the PMOS transistor shorted to VDD here, if it is shorted to VDD, which would physically occur if stray metal caused by a speck of dust during photolithography stage overlapped the VDD line and the drain connection as shown. Apply 0, 1 or 1, 0 input, then the static IDD, that is current between VDD and ground, increases. Thus, we will be able to know that there is a short to VDD. Now, in this particular figure, number 1 in the figure indicates open, number 2 indicates or identifies the short between the output node and the VDD. Number 3 identifies the short between output node and ground. A short in a CMOS results if not enough metal is removed by the photolithography, whereas over removal of the metal results in an open circuit. So fault 1, it disconnects the input A from the gate of the transistors T1 and T3. In such a situation, one transistor may conduct and another transistor may be non-conducting or in the off state. Thus, the fault can be represented by stuck at value of A. If A is stuck at 0, T1 will conduct and T3 will be off. And if we consider stuck at 1 at input A, then T1 will be off and T3 will be conducting. Fault 2 forces the output node to be shorted to VDD. That is, the fault can be considered as stuck at 1 of the output node. Similarly, fault 3 forces the output node to be stuck at 0. Bridging faults. Bridging faults are permanent faults that cannot be modeled as stuck at faults. A bridging fault is said to have occurred when two or more signal lines in a circuit are accidentally connected together. Bridging faults at the gate level has been classified into two types: input bridging and feedback bridging. An input bridging fault corresponds to the shortening of a certain number of primary input lines. A feedback bridging fault results if there is a short between an output and input line. A feedback bridging fault may cause a circuit to oscillate, or it may convert it into a sequential circuit. Delay faults. Smaller defects which are likely to cause partial open or short in a circuit have a higher probability of occurrence due to statistical variations in the manufacturing process. These defects result in the failure of a circuit to meet its timing specifications without any alteration of the logic function of the circuit. A small defect may delay the transition of a signal on a line either from 0 to 1 or vice versa. This type of malfunction is modeled by delay fault. Two types of delay faults have been proposed in literature: gate delay fault and path delay fault. Gate delay fault causes the actual propagation delay of a faulty gate to exceed its specified worst case value. For example, if the specified worst case propagation delay of a gate is x units and actual delay is x plus delta x units, then the gate is said to have a delay fault of size delta x. The main deficiency of the gate delay fault model is that it can only be used to model isolated defects, not distributed defects, for example, several small delay defects. The path delay fault model can be used to model isolated as well as distributed defects. In this model, a fault is assumed to have occurred if the propagation delay along a path in the circuit under test exceeds the specified limit. Undetectable faults. Fault is considered to be undetectable if it is not possible to activate the fault or to sensitize its effect to primary outputs. In other words, the test for detecting the fault does not exist. Temporary faults. Temporary fault can result in an intermittent or a transient error. Transient errors are the major source of failures in the VLSI chips. They are non-recurring and are not repairable because there is no physical damage to the hardware. Transient errors. Very deep submicron technology has enabled the packing of millions of transistors on a VLSI chip by reducing the transistor dimensions. This reduces their noise margins. As a result, they become more vulnerable to noise, crosstalk, etc., which in turn results in transient errors. In addition, small transistors are affected by terrestrial radiation and suffer temporary malfunction, thereby increasing the rate of the transient errors. Intermittent faults are recurring faults that reappear on a regular basis. Such faults can occur due to loose connections, partially defective components, or poor design. Intermittent faults occurring due to deteriorating or aging components may eventually become permanent. Some intermittent faults also occur due to environmental conditions such as temperature, humidity, vibration, etc. An intermittent fault in a circuit causes malfunction of the circuit only if it is active. If it is inactive, the circuit operates correctly. A circuit is said to be in a fault active state if fault is present in the circuit is active, and it is said to be in the fault non-active state if the fault present in the circuit but it is inactive. Because intermittent faults are random, they can be modeled only by using probabilistic methods. Observability. It is the degree to which the node at the outputs of the integrated circuit can be observed. This is used to measure output of a gate within a large circuit to check that it operates correctly. Given the limited number of nodes that can be directly observed, it is the aim of good chip designers to have easily observed gate outputs. The sensitization part of the test generation process requires application of appropriate input values at the primary inputs, so the effect of the fault is observable at the primary outputs. Thus, the ability to observe the response of a fault on an internal node via the primary outputs of a circuit is denoted as observability. Controllability. The ability to apply input patterns to the primary inputs of a circuit to set up appropriate logic value at desired locations of a circuit is known as controllability. For example, in the presence of stuck at 0 fault, location of the fault must be set to logic 1 via the primary inputs. This is known as 1 controllability. Similarly, for stuck at 1 fault, the location of the fault must be set to logic 0 to excite the fault. This is known as 0 controllability. Controllability of an internal circuit node within a chip is a measure of the ease of setting the node to 1 or 0 state. This metric is important when assessing the degree of difficulty of testing a particular signal within a circuit. An easy controllable node would be directly settable via an input, and a node with little controllability might require many hundreds and thousands of cycles to get it in the right state. Making all flip-flops resettable via global reset signal is one step towards good controllability. Fault coverage. A measure of goodness of a set of test vectors is the amount of fault coverage it achieves. The way in which the fault coverage is calculated is as follows. Each circuit node is taken in sequence and held to 0, that is stuck at 0, and the circuit is simulated with test vectors comparing the chip outputs with known good machine. A circuit with no nodes artificially set to 0 or 1. When a discrepancy is detected between the faulty machine and the good machine, the fault is marked as detected and simulation is stopped. This is repeated for setting the node to 1. In turn, every node is stuck artificially at 1 or 0 sequentially. The fault coverage of a set of test vectors is the percentage of total nodes that can be detected as faulty when the vectors are applied. Automatic Test Pattern Generation or ATPG. The functions are implemented at the RTL or schematic level. The mask layouts are completed and the test engineers write the tests. Extra circuitry can be included to ease the burden of the test generation. More of the burden for generating tests has fallen on the designers. Automatic test pattern generation methods are thus invented. So, commercial ATPG tools can achieve excellent coverage. They are computation intensive and often must be run on servers or compute farms with many parallel processors. Some tools used statistical algorithms to predict the fault coverage of set of vectors without performing as much simulation. Adding scan and built-in self-test improves observability of a system, can reduce the number of test vectors required to achieve a desired fault coverage. So we can see here that automatically the test patterns are generated and they are applied as input to the circuit under test, and this circuit is going to produce the outputs. We have a comparator which compares the outputs produced by the circuit under test with the outputs that should actually be obtained if the machine is good. And based on the comparison, the status of the circuit under test would be found. Delay fault testing. The fault models dealt till now have neglected the timing. The failures that occur in the CMOS could leave the functionality of the circuit untouched but affect the timing. Delay fault may be caused by crosstalk, occur more often in SOI logic. Here is an example where actually the circuit would have been like this, but here we have open circuit. So because of this open circuit, there would be delay in the circuit. Design for testability. The phrase design for testability refers to how a circuit is either designed or modified so that the testing of the circuit is simplified. The key of designing circuits that are testable are controllability and observability. Good observability and controllability reduce the cost of manufacturing test because they allow high fault coverage with relatively few test vectors. They can be essential to silicon debug because physically probing most internal signals has become so difficult. Main approaches to design for testability are ad hoc testing, scan-based approaches, and built-in self-test. Application of these techniques to particular types of circuits include random logic or multi-level standard cell or two-level PLAs, regular logic arrays, example data paths, memories such as RAM, ROM, CAM. Ad hoc testing. These are collections of ideas aimed at reducing combinational explosion of testing. Useful for small design where SCAN, ATPG, BIST are not available. What is ATPG? ATPG is automatic test pattern generation. BIST is built-in self-test. So these are not and scan, all these three are not available, then ad hoc testing is used. Complex scan-based testing methodology is recommended for digital circuits. Common techniques of ad hoc testing involve partitioning large sequential circuits, adding test points, adding multiplexers, providing for easy state reset. One of the simplest ways of improving the testability of a circuit is to provide more tests and control points. Test points are in general used to observe the response at a node inside the circuit, whereas control points are utilized to control the value of an internal node to any desired value 0 or 1. By incorporating a test point at node alpha, the input combination 010 or 011 can be applied to detect the fault. So here in this particular circuit, stuck at 0 is undetectable. When this particular output of the AND gate is stuck at 0. Then if the other AND gates are any one of the other AND gates outputs is equal to 1, then the OR gate output will be 1. So when the other AND gates outputs are 0, then the output is 0. Because alpha is anyway stuck at 0. So there is no test to find. But when x1, x2, x3 is equal to 0, 1, 0, then x1 bar will be equal to 1, x3 bar will be equal to 1. So 1, 1 output of AND gate is 1. Similarly, x2 is 1, x1 bar is 1. Actually, output of this AND gate should have been 1. but it is stuck at 0, so it is equal to 0. Now x2 is equal to 1, x3 is equal to 0, so output of this AND gate is equal to 0. x1 and x3 are 0, so output of this AND gate is also 0. Now, because whatever may be the inputs, if this is the circuit and we are checking the output of the OR gate for testing, then we are not able to find the fault. So if I directly check the output of the AND gate, or I take the output of this AND gate as the test point, then I will be able to know that this output is faulty. The usefulness of adding a control point can be appreciated from the circuit shown in the figure. If the output of XNOR gate in the circuit is always 1, indicating that both the outputs of the logic block are same. We know that XNOR output is equal to 1 when the inputs are 0, 0 or 1, 1. That means when both the inputs to the XNOR gate are equal, then the output is equal to 1. So if the output of the XNOR gate is always 1, it implies that these two outputs of this particular logic are equal to, like they are same or equal, either both zeros or both ones. It is not possible to say whether the XNOR gate is operating correctly or not. Now, if a control point is added to the circuit, we are now adding a control point to the circuit in this manner by including an AND gate. One of the outputs of the logic is given as inputs to the AND gate, and another input to the AND gate is the control point. Output of the AND gate is given to the XNOR, and another output of the logic is given as the second input to the XNOR. So the input of the XNOR gate and we are actually adding the control point. The operation of the circuit can be controlled via the added point. To test for stuck at 1 fault at the output of the XNOR gate, control point is set to logic 0. So when control point is set to logic 0, whatever may be the second input of the AND gate, the output of the AND gate will be 0. Now, if one of the inputs is 0, if the second input is also 0, then the output of the XNOR should be 1. Otherwise, if this second input to the XNOR is logic 1, then the output should change to 0. So that is a test. So to test for the stuck at 1 fault at the output of the XNOR gate, so what we are doing, we are setting the control point to logic 0, and the input combination, whatever input combination here we are giving, that will be given in such a way that the second output of the logic will be 1, so that 1 it will be given as second input to the XNOR, so that it should produce logic 0 as the output. But if it produces logic 1 as the output, it implies that the output of the XNOR gate is stuck at 1. Another way of improving the testability of the particular circuit is to insert multiplexers in order to increase the number of internal nodes that can be controlled or observed from the external points. For example, the fault alpha, the same circuit previously whatever we had taken, we had the fault alpha stuck at 0. It can be detected by incorporating a 2:1 multiplexer. So this 2:1 multiplexer, you can see that the test point alpha is given as one of the inputs and the output of the OR gate is given as another input, and which should be the test point, that is indicated by the select line. So when the test input, that is the select input of the multiplexer, is at logic 1, the output of the circuit is transferred to the output of the multiplexer. That means the OR gate output will be transferred to the output of the multiplexer. On the other hand, if the control input is at logic 0, that means this test point or the select line of the multiplexer is logic 0, and the input combination is 0 1 0 or 0 1 1 as I had previously explained, then alpha should have been changed to 1, but it will be stuck at 0, so that we are going to check at the output of the multiplexer. So the state of the node alpha can be observed at the multiplexer output. Scan path technique for testable sequential circuit design. Testing of sequential circuits is complicated because of the difficulties in setting and checking the states of the memory elements. These problems can be overcome by modifying the design of a general sequential circuit so that it has the following properties. The circuit can easily be set to any desired internal state. It is easy to find a sequence of input patterns such that the resulting output sequence will indicate the internal state of the circuit. The basic idea is to add an extra input C to the memory excitation logic in order to control the mode of a circuit. One additional input connection to the modified circuit is required to supply the signal C to control all the switches. When C is equal to 0, the circuit operates in its normal mode, but when C equal to 1, the circuit enters into a mode in which the elements are connected together to form a shift register. This facility is incorporated by inserting double throw switch, that is 2:1 multiplexer in each input lead of every memory element. All these switches are grouped together and the circuit can operate in either its normal or shift register mode. So this is the switch. Inputs A and B are given, and we have an extra input C which controls the switch. C is equal to 0. When C is equal to 0, this is the internal circuitry of the switch. C is equal to 0. Then, like you can see, the output of the circuit is AC bar plus CB. C is equal to 0. That means we are getting A. C is equal to 1. We are getting B as the output of the switch. Or in other words, when C is equal to 0, the circuit will operate in normal mode. But when C is equal to 1, the circuit will operate in such a way that the elements of the circuit are connected together to form a shift register. So this switch is acting like a 2:1 multiplexer. Thus, it allows the circuit to operate in normal or shift register mode. So this particular switch is incorporated at the inputs in this fashion. In the shift register mode, the first flip-flop can be set directly from primary inputs, that is scan-in inputs, and the output of the last flip-flop can be directly monitored on the primary output, that is scan-out output. This means that the circuit can be set to any desired state via the scan-in inputs, and that the internal state can be determined via the scan-out output. The procedure for testing the circuit is as follows. Set C equal to 1 to switch the circuit to shift register mode. Check the operation as a shift register by using scan-in inputs. So we know that when C is equal to 1, the second input to the switch is going to be chosen and sent to the output. So what does this mean? The scan-in input, which is acting as the second input to this particular switch, is going to be selected and given to the D flip-flop. So if we give 0 as the scan-in input, 0 will be given to the D flip-flop, so that output of the D flip-flop should be 0. Similarly, if I give 1 as the scan-in input, then 1 will be given as input to the D flip-flop. What does this mean? This means that the input to the D flip-flop is the scan-in input which we are actually giving. So, and here you can see the second switch, that is the second 2:1 multiplexer, output of which is connecting to the second D flip-flop. You can see that the second input is the output of the first D flip-flop. So what does this mean? Scan-in input will be given as input to the D flip-flop through the first switch, and output of the first flip-flop will be given as input to the second D flip-flop through the second switch, and output of the second D flip-flop is actually checked for any fault. So we basically have now converted this part of the circuit to a shift register. Now set C is equal to 0. So when we had actually changed this to shift register mode, depending upon the scan-in input, we have now set the states of these two flip-flops by actually giving the required scan-in input. Now we are changing the C input to 0 so that it goes to the normal mode. That is, the circuit will be working in normal mode. How it works in normal mode? When C is equal to 0, the A input of the switch will be given to the D flip-flop. In this case, output of this OR gate will be given as input to the D flip-flop, and output of this OR gate will be given as input to the second D flip-flop. So the circuit now returns to the normal mode, and now we apply the test input pattern to the combinational logic. Here only one external input is there, that is X. So to the X input we are going to give the test input, and after giving the test input we will, depending upon the circuitry here, that will be given as input to the D flip-flops. Now C is equal to 1. We are going to change, that will return to the shift register mode. Now shift out the final state while setting the starting state for the next test. So when we are converting C to 1, that means we are changing the C input to 1, that means we are changing it to shift register mode. So already the input to the D flip-flop, we had already got these two inputs, and then we can find out what is the output of the second D flip-flop, and then because C is equal to 1, now the output of the first D flip-flop will be shifted to the second D flip-flop, and then that also can be tested. So we will be able to know whether any fault is there in the circuit. So this we are going to repeat. The main advantage of the scan path approach is that a sequential circuit can be transformed into combinational circuit, thus making test generation for the circuit relatively easy. Besides, very few extra gates or pins are required for this transformation. Built-in self-test. The task of testing a VLSI chip to guarantee its functionality is extremely complex and often very time-consuming. In addition to the problem of testing the chips themselves, the incorporation of the chips into systems has caused test generation cost to grow exponentially. A widely accepted approach to deal with the testing problem at the chip level is to incorporate built-in self-test, that is BIST, capability inside a chip. This increases the controllability and observability of the chip, thereby making the test generation and fault detection easier. In conventional testing, the test patterns are generated externally by using computer aided design tools, that is CAD tools. The test patterns and the expected responses of the circuit under test to these test patterns are used by automatic test equipment to determine if actual responses match the expected ones. On the other hand, in BIST, that is built-in self-test, the test pattern generation, output response evaluation are done on the chip itself. Thus, the use of expensive ATE, that is automatic test equipment machines to test the chips, can be avoided. The main function of the test pattern generator is to apply test patterns to the unit under test or circuit under test, assumed to be multi-output combinational circuit. The resulting output patterns are transferred to the output response analyzer. So, we have a test pattern generator which generates the test patterns and gives to the circuit under test, and the output generated by the circuit under test are given to the output response analyzer for checking whether any faults are present. Under test pattern generation for BIST, test pattern generation approaches can be divided into different categories such as exhaustive testing, pseudo-exhaustive testing, pseudo-random testing, and deterministic testing. Exhaustive testing. In exhaustive testing approach, all possible input patterns are applied to the circuit under test. Thus, for an n input combinational circuit, all possible 2 to the power of n patterns need to be applied. The advantage of this approach is that all non-redundant faults can be detected. Excuse me. However, any fault that converts the combinational circuit into sequential circuit, for example bridging fault, cannot be detected. The drawback of this approach is that when number of inputs is large, the test application time becomes prohibitive, even with high clock speeds. Thus, exhaustive testing is practical only for circuits with limited number of inputs. Pseudo-exhaustive pattern generation. Combinational circuit with n inputs can be pseudo-exhaustively tested with 2 to the power of n or fewer binary patterns if none of the outputs of the circuit is a function of more than W out of n inputs. In general, the pseudo-exhaustive patterns need to test an n input, m output combinational circuit are derived by using one of the following methods: syndrome driver counter, constant weight counter, linear feedback shift register or shift register, linear feedback shift register with XOR gates. The syndrome driver counter method checks if P inputs, that is the P input which is less than the original n inputs of the circuit under test, can share the same test values with the remaining n minus P inputs. Then the circuit can be exhaustively tested with 2 to the power of P inputs. Constant weight counter method uses X out of Y code for exhaustively testing M input circuit, where X is the maximum number of input variables on which any output of the circuit under test depends. Value of Y is chosen such that all 2 to the power of X input combinations are available from any M columns of the code words. Linear feedback shift register with shift register approach. So this is an alternative approach for generating pseudo-exhaustive test set. It uses a combination of LFSR, that is linear feedback shift register, and a shift register. In LFSR, the outputs of selected number of stages are fed back to the input of the LFSR to the XOR network. So you can see they are fed back to the XOR network. N-input LFSR can be represented by irreducible primitive polynomial. If the polynomial is of degree n, then the LFSR will generate all possible 2 to the power of n minus 1 non-zero binary patterns in sequence. This sequence is termed maximum length sequence of the LFSR. And this is the polynomial is represented in this fashion: x to the power of n plus Pn minus 1 x to the power of n minus 1 etc. P2x square plus P1x plus P0. This approach guarantees near minimal test patterns when the number of input variables on which any output of the circuit under test depends is less than half the total number of input variables. So you can see actually LFSR SR approach is nothing but you have shift register constructed using D flip-flops. Output of the XOR network is given as input to the LFSR, and output of LFSR is given as input to the XOR network. LFSR with XOR approach. This is a variation of the previous circuit, that is LFSR SR approach. It uses a network of XOR gate instead of the shift register. LFSR XOR approach produces test patterns that are very close to the previous approach. So here we have an XOR gate. Input to the XOR gates will be the output of any of the D flip-flops, and output of the XOR gate is given as input to the first D flip-flop of the LFSR. Pseudo-random pattern generator. Pseudo-random patterns are sufficiently random in nature, as the name suggests, to replace truly random sequences. LFSRs are widely used for generating test patterns for combinational circuits because it is easy to implement. However, 3 related issues need to be considered in order to measure the effectiveness of pseudo-random testing. That is, determination of the number of test patterns, evaluation of fault coverage, and detection of random pattern resistant faults. Deterministic testing. Traditional test generation techniques may also be used to generate test patterns that can be available to the circuit under test when it is in BIST mode. The test patterns and the corresponding output responses are normally stored in read-only memory or ROM. If the output responses of the circuit under test do not match the expected responses when the stored test patterns are applied, the presence of faults is assumed. Although, in principle, this is a satisfactory approach for fault detection, it is rarely used because of high overhead associated with storing test patterns and their responses. So, up till now, the 4 methods which we have studied are for the test pattern generation of the BIST. Now, we are going to study the output response analysis in the BIST. So, the BIST techniques combine a built-in binary pattern generator with circuitry for compressing the corresponding response data produced by the circuit under test. The compressed form of response data is compared with known fault-free response. Several compression techniques that can be used in BIST environment have been proposed over years and include transition count, syndrome checking, signature analysis. Transition count. It is defined as the total number of transitions of 1 to 0 and 0 to 1 in output response sequence corresponding to a given input test sequence. For example, if the output response sequence Z is given, for example 1 0 1 1 0 1 0, then the transition count would be 4. Thus, instead of recording the entire output response sequence, only the transition count is recorded. Transition count is then compared with the expected one, and if they differ, the circuit under test is declared as faulty. Here, the figure shows the response sequence and the corresponding transition counts at various nodes of the circuit, resulting from application of test sequence of length 4. Let us suppose there is a fault alpha stuck at 0 in the circuit. The result of the fault changes the transition count at certain nodes in the circuit. Here, when we have applied these two inputs to this NOR gate, we are getting this particular output. Now there is a transition from 1 to 0 and again 0 to 1. So two transitions are there. So 2. Here you see 1 to 0 changes there and 0 to 1 changes there, only 2 times. So 2. Here 1 to 0, 0 to 1, 1 to 0, 0 to 1. So 4 transitions are there. So transition count is equal to 4. But when alpha is stuck at 0, it means the output of the AND gate will be 0, whatever may be the other input to the AND gate. So the transition count, which was previously 2, it will change to 0. So automatically the output of OR gate, the transition count will change from 4 to 2. So the main advantage of the transition count is that it is not necessary to store the correct response sequence or the actual response sequence at any test point. Only the transition counts are needed. This results in reduction of the data storage requirements, but this data compression may give rise to fault masking errors. This is because most transition counts correspond to more than one sequence. For example, transition count 2 is generated by each of the following 6-bit sequences. For example, 0 1 1 1 0, 0 1 1 0 0, 0 1 0 0 0, 0 0 1 1 0, 1 1 0 1 1, or 1 0 0 0 1. For all these these inputs, you have a transition count of 2. Hence, there is a possibility that a faulty sequence will produce the same transition count as the good sequence and therefore go undetected. However, as the sequence length increases, the hazard of fault masking diminishes. The second method of output analysis is syndrome checking. Syndrome of a Boolean function, it is defined as S is equal to k by 2 to the power of n, where k is the number of minterms realized by the function and n is the number of input lines. For example, syndrome of a 3-input AND gate is 1 by 8 and 2-input OR gate is 3 by 4. 3-input AND gate, we know output will be 1 only if all the inputs are 1. You have a total number of input combinations. You have 8 input combinations, 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 1 etc. up till 1 1 1. But out of these 8 input combinations, only when the inputs are 1, 1, 1, you are going to produce the output as 1. So the syndrome for 3 input AND gate is 1 by 8. Similarly, the syndrome for 2 input OR gate is 3 by 4 because for 3 input combinations, that is 0, 1, 1, 0 and 1, 1, the output will be 1. Only when the input combination is 0, 0, the output is 0. Thus, the syndrome for 2 input OR gate is 3 by 4. Because the syndrome is a functional property, various realizations of the same function have the same syndrome. Input-output syndrome relation of a circuit having various interconnected blocks depend upon whether the inputs to the blocks are disjoint or conjoint, as well as on the gate in which the blocks terminate. For a circuitry having 2 blocks with unshared inputs, if S1 and S2 denote the syndromes of the functions realized by the blocks 1 and 2 respectively, the input-output syndrome relation S for the circuit is given in the table. If the terminating gate is OR gate, then the syndrome relation will be S1 plus S2 minus S1 S2. Similarly, if the terminating gate is AND gate, then S1 S2, etc. XOR gate S1 plus S2 minus 2 S1 S2. NAND gate, if it is terminating gate, then 1 minus S1 S2. If the terminating gate is NOR gate, 1 minus of S1 plus S2 minus S1 S2. If the blocks 1 and 2 have shared inputs and realize the functions f and g respectively, then the following relations hold good. S of f plus g is equal to S of f plus S of g minus S of fg, and S of fg is given by S of f plus S of g minus S of fg bar minus 1, and S of f XOR g is S of f bar g plus S of fg bar. Now, as an example, let us find the syndrome number of minterms realized by the fan-out free circuit shown in the figure. NAND gate, the syndrome S1, it is given by 3 by 4 because it is 2 input NAND gate, total 4 combination of inputs you will have, out of which 3 outputs are 1. So the syndrome S1 is equal to 3 by 4. Similarly, S2 is equal to 1 by 4 because it is a 2 input AND gate, so 4 input combinations. Out of the 4 input combinations, only 1 output is equal to 1, so S2 is equal to 1 by 4. And S3 will be equal to 1 minus S1 S2, because just now I told you that if the terminating gate is a NAND gate, then the syndrome is given by 1 minus S1 S2. So 1 minus S1 S2 will be 1 minus 3 by 16. That will be 13 by 16. And k is given by s into 2 to the power of n, that is 13 by 16 into 2 to the power of 4, because whole of this circuit has 4 inputs. So 13 by 16 into 2 to the power of 4, we will get 13. This table lists the syndrome of the fault-free circuits of the figure and syndromes in the presence of fault alpha stuck at 0 and fault beta stuck at 1. Alpha is stuck at 0 and beta is stuck at 1. Then in that case, this is the fault-free. This is the truth table, like output of the fault-free circuit. You can see in this circuit x1, x2, x3, 3 inputs are present. So you have 8 input combinations. So applying each input combination, if the circuit is fault-free, what is the output? That has been listed here under fault-free. Excuse me. And when alpha is stuck at 1, what will be the output has been listed here. And when beta is stuck at 0, that has been listed here. So from the truth table, we can know that here fault-free number of ones is 5 out of 8 combinations, so syndrome is 5 by 8. But alpha stuck at 1, number of ones is 2, so syndrome will be 2 by 8. But beta stuck at 0, you have 2, once again 2 by 8. Next is signature analysis. This is another method of analyzing the output of the circuit under test. Signature analysis technique, it detects the errors in the data streams caused by hardware faults. It uses data compaction technique to reduce long data streams into unique code called signature. Signatures can be created from the data streams by feeding the data into n-bit LFSR. So the data is fed into n-bit LFSR. The feedback mechanism consists of XOR operation. So XORing selected taps of the shift register with input serial data. So you have the input serial data from the shift register using the selected taps. Those selected taps will be given as input to the XOR gate, so that this input data and the output of the selected D flip-flop from the shift register will be given to the XOR gate. So output of the XOR gate will be given as input to the shift register. And finally, the signature is going to be generated and analyzed. So after the data stream has been clocked through, a residue of the serial data is left in the shift register. So whatever data input you want to give bit by bit, that is being XORed using the selected taps and given as input. So this goes on till all the input bits of the data are completely clocked. Then finally, whatever value is left in the shift register, that is the residue. This residue is unique to the data stream and represents its signature. Another data stream may differ by only 1 bit from the previous data stream, and yet its signature is radically different from the previous one. To form the signature of a data stream, the shift register is first initialized to a known state and then shifted using the data stream. Normally, all 0 state is chosen as the initial state. So here, this figure shows us an example. You can see the third D flip-flop output is selected and given as input to the XOR gate, and the input data is also being given as input to the XOR gate. So output of XOR gate will be given as input to the shift register. So this figure, it shows us a simplified 4-bit signature generator. So assuming the content of the register is all zeros, so you can see so many, like all the conditions have been mentioned in this particular state diagram, wherein you have paths which shows, here you can see the dotted line shows that the input, if input is equal to 0, what is the transition, and the solid line indicates input is equal to 1. So assuming the content of the registers is all zeros, if a 1 is applied to the circuit, XOR gate will have output as 1, that is indicated by this. But if the input is 0, then it will remain in the same state. But once it goes to 1000 state, once again, if the input bit is 1, then it will go to 1100 state. Otherwise, if the input bit is 0, it will go to 0100 state. Because depending upon the input bit, the output of the XOR gate will change, and automatically the shift register, like each D flip-flop contents, is going to shift. So like this, we get this particular state diagram. Next clock pulse will shift the gate output into the first stage of the register, zeros from the preceding stages into the second, third and fourth stages, which leaves the register containing 1000 or 8, state 8. From the state diagram, the register contents or signatures can be identified for any data string. A signature corresponding to the output sequence produced by circuit under test is usually created by feeding the sequence serially into feedback line of LFSR via additional XOR gate. Signature can also be obtained by feeding subset of the output sequence in parallel when multiple input signature register, that is in short MISR, is used. So the figure here, it shows MISR, that is here 8-bit multiple input signature register is shown in the figure. K-bit MISR can compact an M-bit output sequence, M very greater than K, in M by K cycles. MISR can be considered as parallel signature analyzer. So you can see that the circuit is slightly different. We make use of many XOR gates. So XOR gate output feed each D flip-flop here. But the basic idea is to get the next state of the shift register. And finally, when all the input bits have been exhausted, then whatever residue is left out in the shift register, that will be the signature of that particular data stream. BIST architectures. Built-in logic block observer, that is BILBO. Self-testing using MISR and parallel shift register sequence generator, or in short STUMS. LSSD on-chip self-test, or in short we call it as LOCST. So first we will study built-in logic block observer, that is BILBO. So these circuitry, whatever we are going to study, they consist of the circuit under test. They consist of the test generation unit, which is going to supply the test vectors, and the output of the circuit under test is going to be given to the output analyzer. So everything is present in these circuits, whatever we are going to discuss. BILBO, that is built-in logic block observer. Both scan path and signature analysis techniques are employed. Scan path is for test generation and signature analysis is for the output analyzer. It uses multi-purpose module called BILBO that can be configured to function as input test pattern generator or output signature analyzer. This is composed of a row of flip-flops and some additional gates for shift and feedback operations. The figure shows the logic diagram of BILBO. Two control inputs B1 and B2. Here they are used to select one of the 4 function modes. B1 is equal to 0 and B2 equal to 1. It is mode 1, and all the flip-flops will be reset. B1 is equal to 1, B2 is equal to 1. BILBO behaves as a latch. Input data x1, x2, x3, etc. xn can be simultaneously clocked into the flip-flops and can be read from the Q and Q dash outputs of the flip-flop. B1 is equal to 0 and B2 equal to 0, or that is mode 3. The BILBO acts as serial shift register. Data serially clocked into the register through SIN. Here, this SIN is clocked through the multiplexer serially through all the D flip-flops in the shift register. Register contents simultaneously read at the parallel Q and Q bar outputs or clocked out through the serial output S out. B1 is equal to 1 and B2 equal to 0 is mode 4. The BILBO is converted into MISR. And what is MISR? Multiple input signature register. In this mode, it may be used for performing parallel signature analysis or for generating pseudo-random sequences. The later application is achieved by keeping x1, x2, etc. xn at fixed values. So, when we give b1 is equal to 0, you can see that the output of the AND gates is equal to 0. And we give b2 equal to 1. So when we give b2 equal to 1, so this b2 is given through NOR gate to the XOR gate. So if b2 is equal to 1, one of the inputs to the NOR gate is equal to 1, then the output is equal to 0. So 0, 0, output of the XOR gate will be 0. So everywhere the D input to will be 0, or the D flip or the shift register is going to reset. Now when b1 is equal to 1 and b2 equal to 1, b1 equal to 1, then output of the AND gate will be x1, x2, etc. xn. So b2 equal to 1, so output of XOR gates will be output of the NOR gates will be 0. So this x1, x2, etc. xn will be, so you will have x1 XOR 0, so which will give x1 as the input, x2 XOR 0, which will give x2 as the input, etc. xn XOR 0, which is xn at the input of the D flip-flops. So x1, x2, etc. xn will be clocked into the D flip-flops of the shift register. So, or in other words, it is acting as latch. Third case, b1 is equal to 0, b2 equal to 0. So when b1 is equal to 0, obviously output of AND gates will be 0. So the output of the XOR gate will be whatever the output at the NOR gate. Now b2 equal to 0, in the first case b2 equal to 0, everywhere b2 equal to 0. So one of the inputs to the NOR gate is equal to 0. And what is the other input to the NOR gate? Other input to the NOR gate is the SIN input, which has been sent through the multiplexer. So SIN, that is serial input NOR operation with B2, that is B2 is equal to 0. We will get the value here SIN bar. So that will be clocked into the D flip-flop. So next, whatever the state of this particular D flip-flop, that will be clocked into the next D flip-flop. So like this, serial shifting operation takes place. Now when B1 is equal to 1 and B2 equal to 0, then this will work as the MISR. Now let us see this particular figure wherein such bilbos are connected. So this figure, it shows bilbo-based BIST architecture for two cascaded circuit blocks A and B. Bilbo 1 in this structure is configured as pseudo-random pattern generator, the output of which are applied as test inputs to the circuit block A. And Bilbo 2 will act, or it is configured as parallel signature register and receives the inputs from the circuit block A. That is, output of the circuit block A will be given as input to the Bilbo 2, so that output analysis takes place. Similarly, when circuit block B has to be tested, Bilbo 2 and Bilbo 3 will be configured to act as pseudo-random pattern generator and signature register respectively. So it should be clear that circuit blocks A and B, they both cannot be tested simultaneously, because Bilbo block 2 for circuit A, it should work as parallel signature register, and for circuit B, it should work as pseudo random pattern generator. So this is a modified version of the conventional Bilbo structure. So in addition to the normal serial scan and MISR function, modified Bilbo can also function as LFSR, thus generating pseudo-random patterns. So that has been given here. B1, B2, 0, 0, it will cause serial scan, 0, 1 LFSR, 1, 0 normal, and 1, 1 MISR. So this modified Bilbo structure can perform one of the 4 operations depending upon the B1 and B2 inputs. So the modified Bilbo can be used for simultaneous testing of pipeline structure. So for example, here, so block A and circuit block C can be tested simultaneously. Circuit block A is associated with Bilbo 1 and Bilbo 2. Circuit block C is associated with Bilbo 3 and Bilbo 4. So Bilbo 1 and Bilbo 3 will be acting as pseudo random pattern generators, and Bilbo 2 and Bilbo 4 will be acting as the signature analyzers. But when circuit block B has to be tested, so it will be tested individually, wherein Bilbo 2 will act as a pseudo random pattern generator, and Bilbo 3 will act as the signature analyzer. That means they will be operating as LFSR and MISR boards respectively. Next is self-testing using MISR and parallel shift register sequence generator. Self-testing using MISR and parallel shift register sequence generator, in short STUMS, uses multiple serial scan paths that are fed by pseudo-random number generator as shown in the figure. Each scan path corresponds to, you have scan paths here. So each scan path, it corresponds to a segment of circuit under test fed by pseudo-random number generator. Because the scan paths may not be of same length, excuse me, because the scan paths may not be of same length, pseudo-random generator is run till the largest scan path is loaded. So from the pseudo-random generator, inputs are given to all these scan paths. Until all the scan paths have been loaded, the pseudo-random generator is going to generate the bits. Once the data has been loaded into the scan paths, the system clock is activated. The test results are loaded into the scan path. Test results are loaded into the scan paths and then shifted. They are shifted into the MISR here for analysis purpose. Next is LSSD on-chip self-test, or in short LOCUST, LOCST. It combines pseudo-random testing with LSSD-based circuit structure. The inputs are applied via boundary scan cells, and the outputs are also obtained via the boundary scan cells. The input and the output boundary scan cells together with memory elements in the circuit under test form the scan path. So this is boundary scan cells at the input and the output. So the input and the output boundary scan cells together with the memory elements in the circuit under test, they form the scan path. Some of the memory elements at the beginning of the scan path are configured into LFSR for generating pseudo-random pattern generator. pseudo-random pattern numbers. Some memory elements at the end of the scan path are configured into another LFSR which functions as signature generator. So, depending upon the control signals here, the pseudo-random pattern generator is going to generate the test patterns that will be given to circuit under test. The outputs are going to be given to the circuit signature generator, and based on the output of the signature generator, error signal will be activated if any error occurs or deactivated. So I hope you have understood testing and verification. Basically, what you have to understand is that whenever you design a circuit, we at various levels we are going to verify whether our design is correct or wrong. At the front end as well as at the back end of the design, at every step we check by performing simulations, and even after the chip has been manufactured, still the testing takes place. The thing is, it is tedious to test all the chips because the time taken would be more, and it is expensive also because all the test patterns need to be generated to be given to the circuits under test, so that any faults, if present, would be detected. Now, if we have to reduce the time consumption for testing, already the testing circuits are built inside the chip itself, which will be generating the test patterns as well as analyzing the outputs obtained from the circuit. So that's what we have studied in detail. What are the different methods of finding out the faults, and the built-in circuits also we have studied. So I hope you have understood this particular topic. So thank you.